Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good evening. This is Primetime Asia. I'm Nurafida Fendi. This week in Primetime Asia, the leaders of China and Taiwan today held a landmark summit in Singapore that will put a once unthinkable presidential seal on a historic rapprochement between the former Cold War antagonists. The meeting between Chinese President Xi Jinping and Taiwan's Ma Ying-jeou is the first between leaders of the two sides since the 1949 split following a civil war won by the Chinese Communists. But a technical state of war existed for 30 years after the divorce, and both sides still bristle with weaponry as growing economic relations are yet to fully dispel decades of deep distrust. Meanwhile, back in China, the ruling Communist Party has said that it will allow all families the freedom to have 2 children. Chinese sociologists say there is no reason for the government to stick to a one-child policy, and the people in Beijing have welcomed the opportunity to have a second child. On the environmental front, Chinese President Xi Jinping and his French counterpart François Hollande earlier had issued a joint statement on climate change in Beijing, vowing to promote a working program on accelerating pre-2020 efforts in mitigation, adaptation and support during the Paris Climate Summit. Leaders of South Korea, Japan and China have pledged in Seoul to work towards greater economic integration at their first joint meeting in over 3 years. The Maldivian foreign minister has dismissed talks of political instability after President Abdullah Yamin's PPM-led coalition filed an impeachment motion to oust his former deputy, Ahmed Adib, who is under arrest in connection with an attempt on president's life last month. In the Indian subcontinent, empty Nepalese tankers are seen driving up to the border with China in order to fill up on fuel as an energy crisis deepens in the Himalayan nation. Katani Knox has the details and more.
Chinese sociologists say there's no reason for China to stick to a decades-long strict one-child policy anymore, as people in Beijing welcome the chance to have a second child. The new policy is expected to benefit around 100 million families. There were no immediate details on the new policy or a time frame for implementation, but a leading expert on demographic and social change in China, Mr. Wang Feng, called the change an historic event. For China, for the whole world, there is no other policy, he said, no other population control policy that caused so much influential controversy as the one-child policy did. After 35 years, China has finally put an end to this policy, said Mr. Feng, who is a professor of sociology at the University of California, Irvine. Beijing residents expressed their support for the policy relaxation. One resident said before the policy was eased, he planned to have one child after discussion with his family because the policy didn't allow him to have the second one, and it was hard to register a permanent residence for the second child. Now the policy has been eased, he felt that 2 children are better, and he will certainly want to have 2, said Han Wei, 30, who's planning to have his first baby soon. Meanwhile, Mr. Peng Ran, 28, who is the only child in his family, said the new policy would benefit the next generation. He said the easing of the policy is helpful for the growth of children in the next generation because it will prevent them from being lonely, solitary and unsociable. It is a great help for children growing up, but in regards to the reality, the pressure of raising a child is huge no matter whether you're considering aspects of money or from time, which are not very flexible. So even if the 2-child policy is fully implemented, whether parents can afford the pressure or not is still a question, said Pang. For the first time in decades, China's working-age population fell in 2012. It could be the first country in the world to get old before it gets rich. By around the middle of this century, 1 in every 3 Chinese is forecast to be over 60, with a dwindling proportion of working adults to support them. Chinese President Xi Jinping and his French counterpart François Hollande have issued a joint statement on climate change in Beijing, vowing to promote a working program on accelerating pre-2020 efforts in mitigation, adaptation and support during the Paris Climate Summit. The 2 leaders called for an enhanced transparency system to build trust and confidence in the Paris Pact, as well as the means to review the actions and support of various parties. President Jinping said that China supports France as the host of the conference. voicing confidence that France will successfully play its role as a coordinator to facilitate a balanced and comprehensive result. For China, he said, coping with the climate issue highlights not only China's positive participation in dealing with climate change altogether with the rest of the world, but also the domestic demand for sustainable development. The upcoming climate summit in Paris marks a significant meeting in global efforts to cope with climate change. The joint statement from China and France delivers the message that the two sides are working to improve the multilateral process on climate change so as to boost the upcoming climate negotiations in Paris and make the conference a great success. France will host the climate summit in Paris, COP21, from November 30th to December 11th, which is largely expected to result in a global and binding agreement on addressing climate change. President Hollande is visiting China ahead of the summit to seek China's support for a new climate change deal in Paris. The leaders of South Korea, Japan and China pledged to work towards greater economic integration at their first joint meeting in over 3 years as they work to ease tensions stemming from Japan's wartime past. South Korean President Park Geun-hye, Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe and Chinese Premier Li Keqiang also said they would resume annual meetings which had been suspended since 2012 amid disagreements over history and territory. Mrs. Park said she agreed with Abe and Lee to work towards the conclusion of a 16-nation free trade area as well as a separate three-way free trade deal that has been on the table since 2013. China has been a key proponent of RCEP, which would create the world's biggest free trade bloc of 3.4 billion people. Negotiators for the 16 countries, which also include India, and the 10 states ASEAN countries met in Busan, South Korea last month to discuss market opening and tariff reductions on goods and services. The Maldivian foreign minister has dismissed talk of political instability after President Abdullah Yamin's PPM-led coalition filed an impeachment motion to oust his former deputy, Ahmed Adib, who is under arrest in connection with an attempt on Yamin's life last month. President Yamin rose to power in a bitterly contested presidential election in 2013 and cracked down on opposition activists, leading to further street protests on the Indian Ocean archipelago of 400,000, best known for its tourist resorts. The president escaped an assassination attempt late last month. He has since fired his defense minister, and lately Vice President Ahmed Adib was arrested as part of the investigation into the blast. Two lawmakers told Reuters that Yamin's PPM-led coalition on Tuesday filed an impeachment motion signed by 52 of Parliament's 85 members to oust Adib. The coalition needs a two-thirds majority or at least 57 votes to do that. The country faces many problems that are affecting the tourism industry that it relies on for revenue and employment. Yamin's predecessor, Mohammad Nasheed, was jailed this year for terrorism in a case that has caused an international outcry. Human rights lawyer Amal Clooney has called for sanctions against the Maldives after visiting Nasheed in prison.
Having significant influence over the and the investigation team also believes that the arrest of VP.
Empty Nepalese tankers departed Thangkot in Nepal to drive to the border with China in order to fill up on fuel as an energy crisis deepens in the Himalayan nation. Last month, China's foreign ministry said it would provide Nepal with a certain amount of emergency fuel aid as an energy crisis deepened in the Himalayan nation. Nepal has faced an acute fuel crisis for more than a month since protesters in the lowlands south, angered that a new constitution fails to reflect their interests, prevented supply trucks from entering from India. Nepal signed a deal with China in October to import petroleum products. Last month, China reopened the border crossing with Nepal, and on Monday, Valley President of Tankers Association Basudev Dahal confirmed 22 fuel tankers had left for the border. Nepal has been almost totally dependent on India for overland supplies following earthquakes this year that killed nearly 9,000 people and blocked crossings from China. Nepal has accused India of imposing a blockade to punish Nepal for rushing through the constitution, despite opposition from some minority groups. India denies the accusation, saying its truck drivers fear for their safety.
बाटो राम्रोसँग पिच गरेर ढलान गर्दै राम्रो बनायो भने हामी निरन्तर ल्याउन सक्छ यो।
Welcome back. 9 of the 33 Chilean miners who were rescued from a Chilean mine shaft in 2010 sued their former lawyers in part for mishandling the rights to their story, which has been made into a book and a film starring Antonio Banderas. Quake hit Pakistanis say desperate for aid, and floods hit Iran, killing 6 people, while heavy snow hits northwest China, disrupting traffic. And later, one of Asia's largest hot air balloon contest was held in Saga Prefecture, southwestern Japan. Katini Knox has these details and more. Stay tuned.
Local reports indicated the group of miners were led to believe they would be in charge of a corporation that would control the rights of their story, but that they were duped into signing management of the corporation, known as MSJ, over to their lawyers. Initially, the 33 vowed to maintain a pact of silence about their time underground, so no individual would profit unduly. But that scheme soon broke down as outlets offered to pay miners for media appearances, leading some to say the survivors were being opportunistic, causing some bad blood among the group. The miners quickly became miner celebrities after they were safely extracted from the mine in October of 2010 after being trapped deep underground for 69 days. The miners chose Pulitzer Prize-winning writer Hector Tabar to author the official account of their experience. That account, in turn, forms the backbone of the 33, a film about their ordeal, which is already open in Chile and will be released in the US on November 13th. Residents of Shangla and Mingora in northern Pakistan are still clearing rubble after hundreds of houses were destroyed by an earthquake earlier in the week that killed more than 300 people. Thousands spent the night outdoors in near-freezing temperatures, reluctant to go back inside for fear of aftershocks. Villagers stood on mounds of rubble in Shangla, one of the hardest-hit areas. Farman Ali, a local administrative government official, said around 600 houses had been destroyed in the village. As residents stood over their collapsed homes, children dodged past the rubble on their way to collect free meals from a nearby Sufi shrine, a common source of philanthropic donations in the country. At a nearby village, a medical team from Pakistan's telecom company also arrived to provide assistance to those affected by the quake. Meanwhile, in Pakistan's Swat Valley, around 130 people were reported to have been killed and at least 1,900 homes destroyed. Pakistan's Disaster Management Authority said that although the recent quake that hit Pakistan was massive, it did not cause widespread damage to national infrastructure. Pakistani rescue authorities said they were optimistic about the ongoing relief operations to help victims of the earthquake. As rescuers struggled to form a clear picture of the damage caused by the disaster due to the difficult terrain, Pakistani Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif and army commanders visited affected regions in the northwest. The quake was 213 kilometers deep and centered 254 kilometers northeast of Kabul. Meanwhile, in Iran, flash floods triggered by heavy downpours have killed 6 people in the 2 western provinces of Ilam and Loristan. The Relief and Rescue Organization of the Iranian Red Crescent Society said flash floods have hit the provinces of East Azerbaijan, Ilam, Kurdistan, Kermanshah, Loristan and Khuzestan. Officials in Ilam, a province which borders Iraq, said 3 people were killed following torrential rains. The fatalities included 2 people in the provincial capital of the same name and 1 in the city of Deloran, which is located some 500 kilometers southwest of the Iranian capital Tehran. 1 person is still missing. The floods, which inundated streets and houses in several districts, cut water and electricity supply to many customers. Some 20,000 homes and 1,000 vehicles were damaged by the torrential rains in the province of Ilam, and 25 people have been rescued following the floods and transferred to safe zones. Heavy rain reportedly forced the closure of administrative offices and the cancellation of flights in Ilam. Iran is expecting a relatively wet winter amid international forecasts, suggesting that the Middle East region is bracing for an El Nino climate event, unseen since 1950. Heavy snow this week blanketed northwest China's Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region, seriously disrupting local traffic. In the region's capital, Urumqi, the meteorological department issued a blue alert with a predicted snowstorm and sharp drop in temperature. In Tarchi Daban of Xinjiang's Ili prefecture, accumulated snow reached a depth of more than 10 centimeters. Police officers directed traffic on expressways due to the heavy snow. Some roads are still covered by ice. According to the local meteorological department, the temperature will stay low in the coming days. One of Asia's largest hot air balloon contests has opened in Saga Prefecture, southwestern Japan. 127 balloons are taking part in the 36th Saga International Balloon Fiesta. On the first day, more than 70 balloons lifted off and headed towards targets along the Kaze River. Pilots maneuvered their balloons to drop markers as close as possible to the targets. The organizers expect the 5-day event to draw about 900,000 visitors from Japan and other parts of the world.
And that's it for this week's Primetime Asia. We'll be back at the same time next week with more news and features from the Asia-Pacific region. For more news, you can visit our website at www.rtbnews.rtb.gov.bn. I'm Nurfida Fendi, wishing you a good week ahead and good night. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.